item 7, which is the Performance Exceptions Report for May 2020. And Peter, welcome to the table. I mean, one of the highlights here, I think it's fair to say, is that whilst levels of service clearly have been affected by the lockdown period and by COVID, the effect is not as great as we might have anticipated, and you'll obviously focus on that. And also the other thing to note is that this is the first time we've seen this report fully updated with the results of the residents' survey. So, Peter, I'll hand over to you at that point for some introductory comments. Thank you.
Thank you. To take up your point, I personally would have expected a bigger hit on our services from the lockdown and from the resident survey than we've had. The results at the end of May are about 76%. In some years, without COVID, we've come as low as 78, 79. So we've actually maintained momentum around our services over the lockdown pretty well. Now, obviously, the resident survey was a bit grim in places, but taking that into account, we've come through the COVID period pretty well. It's something that I have heard anecdotally a lot from the community, that they're unaware that council continue to operate through the lockdown, but that's in fact the case. So to step back, this report is the organisational performance against the organisation's performance targets. It's at a high level. As I said, our overall result for levels of service is basically the same as April, around 76%. There's not a lot to add there, except that this is very likely to be the year-end result as well. There's unlikely to be anything but minor change at the end of next month, at the end of the financial year. In terms of capital, watchlist projects are at, call it 70% to round it out. Compared to 73 for April, so in other words, very minor change there. And cycleways are at 83. They have come through relatively unaffected by the whole series of events. Those figures are also likely to be year-end figures in the next report. Moving through now, the exceptions in terms of capital, Ruth's report goes into them in a great deal of detail. This is just the high-level stuff. We're presenting a picture here of the original baseline, so what you set out in the LTP, the current baseline, if it is moved, and the current forecast. If there's any questions on any of the detail behind those projects, I may not be able to answer them directly, but Ruth is here and she would be able to. There's probably not a lot of point in dwelling on the attachments. The levels of service trend graphs show the situation to be stable. The exceptions are attached, and as usual, I'm happy to field the questions I can about process. We will have the managers here of all exceptions for the year-end report. So if there's a need to go into any exception and understand what it means or why it happened or what can be done to intervene, they will be here for next month's report around all the exceptions.
All right, thank you, Peter, and certainly noting the point that there's likely to be little change between this report and the one that we would see in a month's time. Thanks for your comment around availability of people to answer any questions on that final report. But we do have the opportunity for some questions today. Pauline.
Thanks. And these are takeaway questions I don't think you'll be able to answer. Well, the first one, which is on page 30, and it's just mentioned the age dating of our water will take considerably longer, so I'd like to know if there's an approximate date that we will know that age dating, please. And then down to page 31, the wastewater collection, treatment and disposal with the CCTV budget is insufficient to support the goal. So is that going forward, is that currently now? And also noting that we'll have to put a bid in for the LTP if we want to consider that for 600,000. I think we definitely need to take a note of that, because to me this is really important work that we do. So are we currently, have we discontinued that work currently, or is it still going on?
Well, I have to go back to the manager to get the detail on that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So, yeah, if there are questions that are not able to be answered in the room today, if we can get the answers circulated, and particularly if we can anticipate information needing to be provided when we consider the end-of-year position. Thank you. Yanni.
Can we please get information back on page 36, 37 around what the high-risk sites are for the Resource Management Act / clean fill inspections? And can we get some more detail about why that program has lagged so much? I'm just mindful of the fact that we've now got air quality in Woolston, for example, that ECAN's identified as being very breaching, I think, World Health Organization standards, and that's a location where there has been a number of clean fill sites in the past. So I just want to ensure that we can get visibility of what sites we've got identified as high risk. And actually, reading that comment, it seems like there's a more systemic issue, not just the COVID-19, as to why that's not being done.
Okay.
So I'd really like to make sure that we're on top of that. I had another question on page 32, I think it is. Sorry, there was just one around parks volunteer hours, and it says we're not going to meet the target, and I accept that. I understand with COVID-19, but it's got the measure listed as 0, and I would have thought we would have done some work, so it should be higher than 0. It just didn't seem right, so I'm just flicking through the pages. It's the parks performance measure of volunteer input.
Which page is that on, Yanni?
Sorry, I was just trying to. 37. 38.
Thank you.
Measure 6.3.7.1, where it says regional parks, 80 volunteer hours per 1,000 people, actual 0, and the comments are 27.1. So maybe the 27's the actual target.
I think they've simply transposed it because the comment's not a comment, that's the actual.
Cool. So, yeah, I just, it still seems quite low, but it would, yeah, I don't know about others, but yeah, I just,
Well, volunteerism is down across communities, and the lockdown made it impossible as well. So that may be the obvious explanation, but I'll go back and check with Andrew.
This is a 12-month target ending in June, end of June. So for the 9 months before COVID-19, to only have 27.1 would seem still like that's less than half the measure. Yeah, well, maybe that's the information that would come back. But
Let's get some information back on it so that we can see it in context. That would be good. Thank you. Jimmy.
Okay, thank you. On page 28, this project list, I just want to know what are the criteria, to highlight this project, particular watch list, the capital project, the exceptions.
You mean why are they exceptions?
Yeah.
Because they're not within their due date.
Yeah, but not in due date. My understanding still quite a few. Some other project is not, in the due date, etc. It's not only this one, but why just pick up this one?
There are I think Ruth can correct me, about 1,200 projects. This is just the watch list group, which is a much smaller subset.
Yes.
And the exceptions are those which are not on time.
But only
So-
these several projects not on time. The other all on time, or not?
No, I don't think that's the case. Ruth's report covers that in more detail.
Yeah. All this one is particular.
This is
specific purpose.
high-level organisational performance rather than non-watch list exceptions, which would run to a very long list.
So at the beginning of each financial year, we determine what are the watch list projects. So those are ones that are high public profile or significant investment. So at the beginning of the year, we decide what those are. You guys endorse that, and so they end up being on Peter's performance exception report. So all the other projects, they're managed and they're monitored through our governance boards, management boards within the council. These are the ones that you've told us you've got a particular interest in.
So was there something, Jimmy, you were expecting to see there that's not there on this list?
Yeah, because I'm concerned, like Hoswell Junction Road, not on the list, not any the list. This we repeated for several years, but I didn't see why not in here. Hoswell Junction Road extension, that's a project.
So presumably that's because that project is not on this particular list.
Why not
And of
here?
course,
Yes.
taking the point, We decide what goes on that list at the beginning of the financial year, so therefore that determines what gets reported against through this channel
Yeah.
versus the normal reporting through other channels. So that might be worth bearing in mind if there are projects that you would want considered to be on this list in the new financial year. It might be an idea to be making a note of those so that you can bring them into that discussion for consideration.
I'm about to present my report, and I will ask you explicitly in that presentation what projects you want on there for the next financial year.
Councillor Chen, it is reported, it just is reported through the PMO route, just not on this performance. So you will see it in the same meeting, it's just in a different report, that's all.
Okay.
Okay, you've already decided, you decide the watch list each year.
Okay. I just want to know. Yes. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Anne.
Thank you. On the same page, thanks Peter, just 28, just wondering if there's any one particular reason why the cycleways are not reaching their targets, or is there one general reason? Is it funding, or are there other reasons? Given, I really appreciated, Ruth, your explanation about why we are looking at these things, the community interest in the cycleways, obviously, and getting them completed. It would be useful to be able to communicate why they're being delayed.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think I should try to provide an answer for why it's not 100. 83, 84 is still quite high, given that there are always barriers to projects, whether it's weather, consents, property acquisition, whatever. It's very seldom that a program comes in at 100%. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen it truthfully done. There's always barriers to some capital project. What those exact ones are in this case that make up the 16%, Dave might be able to tell you, but I can't.
It'll come up in Ruth's report again. She's
Yeah.
got a detail on the cycleways and that whole program, so maybe we just wait.
Yeah, if we wait till we get to the capital report, that's the opportunity to raise that particular issue, I think. Okay, Yanni.
I just had one final question in relation to the roads and footpath measure. It's at the target's 39,
Which page is this, Yanni?
page 31 and
Thank
32. And I just wanted to thank staff for the really comprehensive assessment. I thought it was really enlightening, but in their comments, it actually raises a really significant concern about the work that Skirt's done. And so I just wanted to check, like, are we going to get some sort of report on what's happened to our infrastructure because of the way in which Skirt did the work, given the issues that are raised in here? Which, if I just quote, it basically says, the backlog created by underinvestment is compounded by the significant volume of trenching work undertaken to underground services, creating joints that have let water into the road construction, changing traffic patterns, and where to the network never designed for such. So it would explain a lot of why we're getting really a lot of dissatisfaction. I'm certainly seeing it in my area where the footpaths are just slumping in the middle, but I don't know all the evidence behind it. But it does seem quite extraordinary that we've allowed a technology to be used that's actually damaged our roading, and we don't seem to. I mean, this is good. This is the first time I was aware of that. So I just wondered if there was a report. And the second question is, given that we've got such low satisfaction, both in this and the footpaths, I'm just wondering, when are we getting the CRAF projects that, those business cases, those really awesome business cases that you did around the capital acceleration funding? When can we start seeing some of that money being released going into the roading projects and footpath projects to improve this level of service?
So, in terms of the first question around the low resident satisfaction survey, this is not new and it hasn't been improving for a number of years. Obviously, Skirt did a lot of work post-quake, and a lot of that was underneath the ground, so they needed to dig up the road to get to the pipes to repair them. And when they put something back on top, obviously the road can sometimes, depending on how many times you dig it up, it loses some of its integrity, and you get weather tightness issues and other things. So they did a lot of work on that, and there was no purpose in council, obviously, at that stage going in and resurfacing the roads, because Skirt were in the midst of digging them up and replacing the underground infrastructure. So we did the right thing in terms of leaving them to do their bit. Then post that time, as is outlined in here, we haven't done a lot of resurfacing and resealing. And we brought that to your attention and as part of the 18 to 28 LTP, and there was further investment put into that, and we've managed to resurface a slightly greater proportion of the network, and again in the draft activity management plan and asset management plan, we'll be bringing that to your attention for the 21 to 31 LTP. And from a staff perspective, it's simply a matter of increasing funding to improve that smoothness of the road network, which at the moment has simply been affected by all the works that Skirt did post-quake, digging it up, and a kind of a lack of investment since then in comparison with other major metros throughout the country. So, we do 2 to 3% a year, most others do 6 to 8%. So that compounds year on year on year, and it's reflected in the resident satisfaction survey and the other measures that we have around smoothness of the network. And I can't speak to that because I wasn't that close to the Skirt program, but I think the original estimate was pretty significant, and in the end there was some money that wasn't delivered. I don't know the absolute numbers. In terms of the CRAF business cases, the money's been transferred to council, and we're scoping that out at the moment. I think this coming financial year we'll probably spend a lot of time working out where we best think it needs to be spent, engaging and getting feedback from community boards and council. So I don't think we'll see a lot of money being spent as part of the CRAF funding in the next financial year. I think a lot of it will be in planning, but in the year following that we will certainly look to ramp up pretty quickly. But we want to still get feedback from the community as to what areas they want that to be invested on.
We'd already identified those areas with those business cases, and they were quite detailed. So I guess I was just trying to, given how low this stat is, and given the seriousness of the lack of seal, I just find this, I don't know, maybe we can discuss it in the Transport Committee.
Clearly there's some further work needs to be done, but I would imagine we would want to be, given that the funding's been made available, we would want to be getting on with this as quickly as possible so that the community gets the benefit as quickly as possible. Again, particularly given that we've got the survey results back, and we know that this is an area of community concern. So certainly on the back of Yanni's question, I would encourage us to be pushing this along as fast as we possibly can, with appropriate briefings or reporting or decisions coming back to wherever they need to as quickly as possible.
So shall I just move that we refer this level of service to the Transport Committee for a report and what can be done?
Well, if that's what needs to happen, I don't understand enough about the process to know what needs to happen.
The concern I have is the reactive maintenance cost is going like this, and we've got some money that we could spend that could bring that down and get this to a better place.
Certainly we do intend to be getting on with the CRAF as soon as possible, but there's always lead-in times for delivery of transport projects, as there is with any project. So we were looking to, as part of our transport bi-monthly, provide a pretty chunky update in terms of the CRAF funding and how we intend to progress that. However, the transport bi-monthly, I think we're now looking to report that to September, just because the August Urban Development and Transport Committee is very busy. So
Richard, I suggest what we do is actually we bring a briefing to members as soon as possible on our Tuesday briefing so that they can see the detail and understand that.
Sure.
And then we can move on from there.
Yeah, and that will allow us to understand what the decision-making process and the consideration process around that is. I think you're getting a sense out of the meeting this morning that, urgency in getting on with this is where we want to go. Okay, so now I've got questions from Leanne and from Sam and from Sarah. Leanne.
Mine's just a clarity one because when Yanni asked his question, it could have sounded as if Skirt had used a particular technology or done something particularly wrong, which led to this. But the point, I think you've clarified it, that they were digging under the road. They didn't complete the seal, but we weren't doing the second seal. They weren't doing. They weren't responsible for anything other than restoring the basic network under the cost sharing agreement, which was the fundamental flaw in the cost sharing agreement. So that's history. Yep. What we have to do though is we have to invest extra in the renewals that weren't done over the time because we had an earthquake and and basically the money that we had set aside for renewals was what we were investing in our proportion of the costs of renewing the basic infrastructure that had been damaged. Isn't that right?
That's absolutely correct.
All right.
Well,
So,
that was a vote of the council, Yanni.
all right. So, Sam?
Mine's just a wee bit of a follow-up to Yanni's. I'm just trying to understand, in terms of that acceleration fund, I mean, that was my understanding as well, was we'd done the business cases, so we effectively knew where we were going to fire the money at.
Yep.
But from what you've said, it'll be effectively 18 months before we've done anything.
Look, it's probably best left to a formal briefing or report to Transport by Monthly, but we've got the money, we're working out a program which is in line with the business case, but there's always a lead-in time before we can deliver transport projects. I mean, under the Local Government Act, and we often do consultation or engagement for these things. That takes a significant period of time, even if the works are pretty minor. Then if you're looking about changing the road network to something which is a bit different to what it currently is, say removing car parks, we often consult on that. There's often pushback on some of that sort of thing, and it just takes a lot of time to get through both the council system. We'll also be applying for NZTA funding, and you'll see from some of the capital watch list issues that takes time as well.
So are we currently consulting on anything from that fund?
No.
All right,
We've only just got the money.
Let's refer all of this to that briefing that Dawn talked about.
Yep.
But you're picking up a clear sentiment from this meeting about the kind of things we'll probably be raising in that briefing, not least how quickly can we get on with some of this.
Yes.
Realising that, there are processes that need to be gone through and some of those take time, as you've described.
Yep.
So I will be expecting that briefing from officers to be able to say, how can we accelerate?
Yeah.
And here's the solutions to do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, Sarah.
And then just the last bit on that, there's a couple of things. We don't consult where we're just replacing road surfacing because it's not a change to the road, so we should be able to be getting on with some of that. And we have in the past had some expressions around the table of really wanting to involve the community boards in decisions over which roads and things were prioritised, and that's been something that as a council we've expressed. But there will be some roads in those areas that we just know need to be done, and that we know that the community boards. So if there's a way for, as part of that, for there to be a mix of that stuff that we're proposing just to get on with, and stuff we want more community board feedback on, because then we can just get on.
Yeah, and even where we do want community board feedback, we can set some tight timelines so that we get that quickly, and that's about the way we take those discussions to the community board and expecting a response. All right, now that's been a good discussion, and let's see if we can get that briefing locked in as early as possible so that we can get on with this as quickly as possible. That's great. Thank you very much. Any further questions? All right, so I'm happy to move that we receive the information in the performance exceptions report for May 2020. Pauline, you'll second that. No debate. All those in favour say aye. Against, that's carried. Thank you very much.